I watched the man who stole my life's work straighten his silk tie, radiating the kind of unearned confidence only a thief can afford. Evan didn't know that the data currently glowing on the boardroom projector was a digital suicide note, and I was the one who had signed his name to it. The room smelled of expensive cologne and the metallic tang of high-stakes anxiety. In exactly 60 seconds, the CEO would ask the one question Evan couldn't answer, and I would sit in the front row, sipping lukewarm coffee, while I watched his entire career catch fire and burn him alive. This wasn't just a meeting, it was an execution. My name is Maribel Knox. For 8 years, I have been the ghost in the machine of this firm, a senior data strategist who built the models that kept this company's heart beating. I am reliable. In the corporate world, when they call a woman reliable, it's code for, she'll do the work of 3 people and won't complain when you forget to thank her. Evan, on the other hand, was dynamic. He was loud, he was charming, and he possessed the sociopathic ability to take credit for a sunrise he didn't even wake up to see. The betrayal wasn't a sudden slap, it was a slow, calculated erosion. It started with him asking for input on my risk models, then referencing my forecasts in emails where my name was conveniently moved to the BCC line. I felt the walls closing in, the quiet erasure of my existence, but I stayed professional. I stayed quiet. Until the night I caught him red-handed. It was 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. I had stepped away from my terminal for 5 minutes to take a call from my mother. When I returned, the cursor on my screen was moving. Someone was accessing my deep archive files, the proprietary restructuring plan I'd been building for the CEO for 6 months. It was a project worth millions in potential savings, the kind of work that makes a partner out of a strategist. I didn't scream. I didn't run to HR. I sat in the darkness of the empty office and watched the remote access log. There it was, Evan's workstation ID, pinging my credentials. He wasn't just stealing a file, he was stealing my future. My stomach did a slow, sick roll, but my mind stayed cold. See, Evan made one fatal mistake, he assumed I was as soft as I was quiet. He didn't realize that a data architect knows exactly where the load-bearing walls are. And I knew how to make them collapse. For the next 48 hours, I lived on caffeine and spite. I didn't block his access. Instead, I opened a dummy folder that looked identical to my final report. I rebuilt every spreadsheet, every Python script, and every visual forecast. To the untrained eye, to a man like Evan who understood the aesthetic of data but not the mechanics, it looked flawless. It looked like a miracle of efficiency. But deep in the logic of the formulas, I had buried cascading errors. I layered the data with inconsistencies that only appeared when certain what-if scenarios were triggered, the exact scenarios I knew our CFO, a human calculator named Marcus, would demand to see. The morning of the presentation, the atmosphere in the office was thick, like the air before a lightning strike. Evan walked past my desk, pausing just long enough to offer a condescending pat on my shoulder. Big day, Maribel. Don't worry, I'll make sure the board knows you assisted on the prep, he said, his voice dripping with fake sincerity. I'm sure you'll give me exactly what I deserve, Evan, I replied. My voice didn't tremble. I had already forwarded the server access logs, timestamped screenshots of his unauthorized login, and my initial IT inquiry to a private folder. I was a strategist. I don't just win, I ensure the other side can never play the game again. The boardroom was a tomb of polished wood and glass. The CEO, Arthur Sterling, sat at the head of the table, his eyes sharp as flint. Next to him was Marcus, the CFO, who was already frowning at his tablet. Evan stood at the front of the room, the projector illuminating his face. He looked like a star. He spoke with a polished, American Psycho rhythm, using my phrases, my insights, and my hard-won conclusions. He even used a joke I'd made about market volatility, and the board chuckled. I sat there, a support staff member in the shadows, watching him dance on the edge of a cliff. Slide 12 was the turning point. It was the slide titled, Projected Cost Efficiency 2027. This was the meat of the restructuring plan. Evan clicked the remote with a flourish. As you can see, Evan said, his voice booming with authority, by shifting our logistical dependencies, we can realize a 22% increase in margin within the first 18 months. It's a bold move, but the data is undeniable. Arthur leaned forward. Those are aggressive numbers, Evan. Are they stress-tested against the new regulatory shifts in the EU? Evan didn't miss a beat. Extensively. I personally ran the simulations through 3 different volatility filters. Liar. I hadn't even finished the EU filters in the real version. He was looking at a set of numbers I had literally pulled out of thin air and wrapped in beautiful, convincing charts. Marcus? Arthur asked, glancing at the CFO. Marcus didn't look up from his screen. His brow was furrowed. Evan, look at the dependency logic on cell G42 in the live model you shared. If the interest rate moves even half a point, this entire projection flips. According to this, we'd be losing $4 million a month, not gaining it. Why is the logic contradicting the summary slide? The color drained from Evan's face so fast it was like someone had pulled a plug. Well, that must be a legacy calculation in the background. If you look at the macro view. I am looking at the macro view, Marcus snapped, finally looking up. His eyes were cold. The macro view is built on the micro logic. And your micro logic is a disaster. It looks like it was written by someone who doesn't understand basic calculus, let alone global logistics. Evan's confident stance began to crumble. He started clicking back and forth through the slides, his movements jerky and panicked. There must be a glitch in the file transfer. Maribel, you handled the final upload, right? The room went silent. Every head turned toward me. This was the moment. The trap had sprung, and Evan was reaching for me to pull him out of the pit. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. Actually, Evan, I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a razor, I didn't handle that upload. My records show that the final version of this file was accessed and modified last night at 11:45 p.m. from a workstation that wasn't mine. I assumed you were doing a final review of the data you finalized. Arthur's eyes narrowed. 11:45 p.m.? Maribel, you were logged out by 6 o'clock. I said calmly. But someone used my credentials to bypass the security protocols on the sensitive files server. I actually flagged this with IT security this morning because I was concerned about a data breach. The air in the room became heavy, expensive, and suffocating. The CTO, Sarah, who had been silent until now, tapped a few keys on her laptop. I'm looking at the audit trail now, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. The file Evan is presenting was pulled from Maribel's private sandbox, not the shared drive. And it was pulled using Maribel's login, from Evan's desk. The silence that followed was deafening. It was the sound of a career hitting a brick wall at 100 miles an hour. Evan's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked at the CEO, then at Marcus, then finally at me. For a split second, I saw the mask slip. The dynamic executive vanished, replaced by a terrified little boy who had been caught stealing from the cookie jar. I can explain, Evan stammered. We were collaborating. It was a joint effort, and A joint effort? Arthur interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You used a colleague's credentials to access unvalidated data, presented it to the board as a finished strategy, and nearly led this company into a regulatory nightmare. That isn't collaboration, Evan. That's fraud. The CEO stood up. He didn't look at Evan anymore. To Arthur, Evan was already a ghost. Sarah, lock his access immediately. Marcus, I want a full audit of every project this man has touched in the last 3 years. Maribel, my office. Now. As I stood up, I passed Evan. He was trembling, his hands shaking so hard he dropped the presentation remote. It shattered on the hardwood floor. I didn't stop to help him. I didn't even look down. I walked out of that room with my head held high, the sound of my heels echoing like a countdown. The aftermath was a clinical, administrative bloodbath. The investigation I had triggered didn't just find the theft of my files, it found a pattern. Evan had been borrowing work for years, using a combination of social engineering and minor security lapses to build a career out of other people's brilliance. He hadn't just stolen from me, he had stolen from the company's bottom line. By 3 p.m., security was standing at Evan's desk with a cardboard box. There were no goodbye drinks. There were no wishing you the best in your future endeavors emails. There was only the sound of a badge being deactivated and the soft click of a door closing behind a man who would never work in this industry again. I spent 3 hours with the legal team and compliance. I handed over everything, the logs, the screenshots, the emails where I had subtly warned him to stay in his lane. I was precise. I was professional. I was reliable. When I finally walked into Arthur's office, he was staring out the window at the city skyline. He didn't ask me to sit. You knew, he said, turning around. You knew he was going to fail. I knew the data he stole wasn't ready, I said, meeting his gaze. I didn't tell him to steal it. I didn't tell him to lie to the board. He chose to present work he didn't do and didn't understand. I simply allowed the consequences of his choices to manifest. Arthur studied me for a long moment. I could see him recalculating my value in his head. I wasn't the quiet strategist anymore. I was the person who had surgically removed a cancer from his executive team without breaking a sweat. We're promoting you to Director of Strategy, effective immediately, he said. And I want you to lead the internal task force on data integrity. It seems we have a problem with the attribution in this company. I want you to fix it. I'll need a larger budget, I said. And full autonomy over the hiring process for my new team. Done, Arthur said. I walked out of his office and back to my desk. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an unknown number. You ruined me. You set me up. I'll make sure everyone knows what you are. I didn't delete the text. I forwarded it directly to the legal department as part of my ongoing harassment file. Then, I blocked the number. I looked around the office. People were staring at me, their expressions a mix of awe and genuine fear. They should be. Because the reliable woman they thought they knew was gone. In her place was someone who understood that in the world of high finance and big data, the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one shouting. It's the one who knows exactly how to change a single digit in a spreadsheet and wait for the world to explode. As I packed my bag, I noticed a small, silver picture frame Evan had left behind in his haste. It was a photo of him at a gala, smiling, holding a trophy he probably didn't earn. I picked it up, looked at it for a second, and then dropped it into the trash can. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside. As the mirror-lined doors slid shut, I caught my reflection. I wasn't smiling. I didn't feel the rush of a win. I just felt the quiet, steady hum of justice. The ghost in the machine had finally taken control of the engine, and I was never going back to the shadows again. My phone buzzed one last time. An email from legal. Subject, additional findings, prior projects. I opened it. As I read the list of other names, other colleagues Evan had stepped on to rise, I realized this wasn't just my revenge. It was a reckoning. And I was just getting started. I leaned back against the cool glass of the elevator, watching the floor numbers climb. Level 40. The executive suite. The doors opened, and for the first time in 8 years, I wasn't there to assist. I was there to rule.